Trump says that tariffs make the U.S., the international world, the trade world, more fair. It helps, bring manufacturing jobs to the U.S., so it helps workers, that sort of thing. Harris claims that the tariffs, and we don't really fully know what those will look like because a lot of the ideas that Trump is, he's kind of floated them and they're not like solid concrete.
Right.
Like one is 10% across the board tariffs.
Sure.
And then, she, as many economists say, tariffs kind of cause the cost of goods to increase. So it's like an indirect tax on consumers here in the U.S.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by economics reporter Zach Halaschak. Zach, we've gotten a couple of different good news reports on inflation. What is the latest?
So inflation keeps coming down. So the latest report was the Consumer Price Index, which is the most closely watched inflation gauge. It actually fell from 2.9% to 2.5% last month, which is getting, we're in the spitting distance of the Fed's 2% goal here. And that's kind of what the Fed wants inflation to run at 2% every year. That's the ideal. We got up as high as like 9% on the CPI back in 2022. And so now we're finally coming down into levels that are a little more manageable. But again, you need to emphasize that while it's 2.5% inflation for this past year, voters, consumers aren't really experiencing, that because they've had 3 years now of cumulative inflation.
Sure.
So it's like more like 20% higher prices across the board now than they were when Biden first entered office in 2021. And that's obviously why this issue is still such a big matter for the campaign trail.
So Trump and Harris have had their debate, and now they're having ongoing debates on the campaign trail effectively every day.
Yep.
And one of the big issues that they've sparred over is taxes. Harris has gone at the Trump tax cuts. Trump has suggested that Harris might be a tax hiker. What was sort of the status of some of those disputes?
Yeah, so during the debate, especially, Harris kind of panned Trump and went after him for, trying to raise taxes or to lower taxes for the wealthy and for big corporations. That's kind of the line of attack that Democrats and Kamala Harris have used, is that Trump's tax policies, namely as the 2017 Trump tax cuts, are designed to help the wealthy, to help big businesses and not for the middle class or working class voters. That's not necessarily true because a big chunk of the Trump tax cuts, actually the biggest part, affected individual rates for people really across the board.
Right.
So most people saw a tax cut because of the 2017.
If you're paying income taxes, you probably saw a tax cut.
Exactly. I think it's like something like 80% of all taxpayers saw their taxes go down. And it kind of is a tricky conundrum because Harris is, like Biden, vowed not to raise taxes on anyone earning over $400,000.
Right.
But here she is railing against this tax package and saying it should be repealed. So there's kind of this question of, if she sticks to that pledge of not raising taxes on anyone earning under $400,000, she's going to have to restore a big portion of the Trump tax cuts. So it's kind of a complicated issue that, and it's interesting to see how the messaging will be as we get closer. The big debate for this is going to be next year when all these provisions expire. I think Republicans have said if they keep control of the House and win the Senate, immigration is going to be the number one priority. But after that, it's going to be dealing with this fiscal situation and extending these tax cuts.
One area where Harris has tried to characterize Trump as a taxer and a tax hiker has been on tariffs, and she called the Trump tariffs the Trump sales tax during the debate. But they've kind of gone back and forth as to who would actually pay the tariffs and what the economic effects of the tariffs would be.
Yeah, Trump says the tariffs make the U.S., the international world, the trade world, more fair. It helps, bring manufacturing jobs to the U.S., so it helps workers, that sort of thing. Harris claims that the tariffs, and we don't really fully know what those will look like because a lot of the ideas that Trump is, he's kind of floated them and they're not like solid concrete.
Right.
Like one is 10% across the board tariffs.
Sure.
And then, she, as many economists say, tariffs kind of cause the cost of goods to increase. So it's like an indirect tax on consumers here in the U.S. And there's been tons of projections that have been put out by different groups, organizations, kind of trying to get a sense of what the economic effect would look like. And so she'd said that it would be a $4,000 tax hike for middle-class families. I looked into that a bit, and that was based on 20% across-the-board tariffs, which Trump did mention offhandedly once at a North Carolina rally, but it's largely been 10%. So that number is a bit overstated, and then also even within that is on the high end of estimates. But yeah, it's I think both are kind of using, and it's important to note that Democrats have largely been the supporters of tariffs in the past. Like Republicans have been more free market, open markets, low tariffs, all that, and it's kind of flipped the script here, where you have a Republican arguing for this huge ramp up of tariffs, so it would be very historically high compared to past tariff policy.
Sure.
And you have the Democrat sort of railing against tariffs, so it's kind of inverse there.
And this ostensible tax on business being passed on to consumers, and consumers actually paying the cost.
Exactly. So it's an interesting dynamic to see play out, but again, Trump can't just go into office and unilaterally slap 10-20% tariffs across the board. That's going to have to come through Congress, and I think that there's a lot of lawmakers in the Republican Party. They're very wary about, maybe ramping up tariffs, especially to that degree.
They're not quite so slap happy about tariffs.
No, they're not. They don't want to just slap a tariff on anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And so one rejoinder Trump does have is that the Biden-Harris administration has kept a lot of his China tariffs in place.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, they have, and that's something that you'll see Republicans say, look, you kept his policies in place. Clearly, he was doing something right if you're going to keep them in place. And Biden, there's been a few tweaks here and there, but largely the tariffs on China, I think, is kind of a issue even with a lot of supply siders I talk to and economists. They might say we're not fans of across the board tariffs on our allies, that sort of thing, but we are in favor of the China tariffs. They recognize that China is the U.S.'s biggest geopolitical adversary, and to kind of go target China is something that is politically appetizing for people in both parties.
Thank you, Zach.
Yep.
You can read Zach and the rest of our policy team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.